All right, man, peace. So, brothers, this is going to be part 2 to volume 1 of the new series that I've recently started called Pupil of Narcissus. And of course, the first subject of this series is Mr. Antonio Brown, the much beleaguered former superstar wide receiver of the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Oakland Raiders, and now the New England Patriots. And his story has pretty much ended, at least from the sporting aspect, as I figured it would eventually, because as I've already stated numerous times in other videos, pride goes before destruction, as the scriptures tell us in Proverbs 16 and 18, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Antonio Brown, unfortunately for him, is going to be the last person to understand and also acknowledge that it is his own self-infatuation that is leading to his sequential and incremental destruction. As a person, he's destroying himself from the inside out, and he's trying to act as if he's keeping it together, when in all reality, he's very similar to a person who's cutting himself. He believes that there's nothing wrong, but he's going to continue to project himself as someone who has it all together because he has to promote this veneer for his audience on social media, people who don't really know him or care about him, because as most people who are members of a cult or who have a cult mentality, they're just trying to maintain that idol for themselves, because that stops them from putting the focus on the lack of depth and substance in their own lives. That's truly what idolatry is about. People look towards idols to help them forget how much they hate themselves. So it's a codependent toxic rapport or toxic dynamic there, the cult leader and the cult member. So anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
To football we go. The Patriots released controversial receiver Antonio Brown on Friday, less than 2 weeks after signing him. Text messages sent by Brown to a woman alleging sexual misconduct were viewed by some in the organization to have crossed the line, a source told ESPN. The text messages, which were first reported by Sports Illustrated on Thursday and included a picture of the woman's children, which her lawyers called intimidating, were significant in that they were sent while Brown was a member of the Patriots, the source.
Not only intimidating, but also unbelievably stupid. What was your intention in doing that? Do you believe that it's going to shame the woman into no longer bringing forth any types of allegations?
Yesterday, before the games kicked off, Antonio Brown decided to unload on Twitter, writing this: "Will not be playing in the NFL anymore. These owners can cancel deals, do whatever they want at any time. We will see if the NFLPA hold them accountable. Sad they can just void guarantees anytime. Going on $40 million, 2 months. We'll see if they pay up."
That's a very interesting point, but Antonio Brown has no one to blame but himself, and most likely his agent as well. If these NFL franchises were able to void his contract, it's normally due to some type of personal conduct policy written within the contract. He should have an understanding that he has to conduct himself a certain way, or his agent should be informing him that he has to conduct himself a certain way in order to guarantee that the guaranteed portion of the contract actually has to be fulfilled. But once again, we'll find out. As he's already stated, it's going to be forwarded to the NFL Player Association, the weakest player association of any of the 3 major team sports in America. Maybe they'll be able to enforce the money that was quote-unquote guaranteed to him.
On Roethlisberger's past transgressions, 4 games for Big Ben. Crazy world. I'm done with it.
That could mean a lot. AB says, crazy world, I'm done with it. Hopefully he's able to maintain enough mental stability to understand that he has children that he has to preside over, and that everything cannot just be about him. What he truly needs is to unplug from social media for a while, but that's the problem. That's the main issue that he has. It's not really with the NFL. It's not even really with women. It's with that damn social media, because he's constantly trying to maintain his facade. That's what's stopping him from sitting back and analyzing himself and saying, you know what? I was wrong here, here, and here. I made too big a deal about certain things, and it started to mushroom. As I've already stated, though, AB is a Luciferian. He's a venerator of the quote-unquote GOAT God. He tries to act as if he's some believer in the Most High. He uses this term called God, which allegedly is meant to imply the God of the Bible, but that's not who he's talking about. He's talking about the quote-unquote Baphomet, as I've already proven in a video that I've done a few months ago.
On Robert Kraft. Kraft got caught in the parlor. AB speculations fired. Different strokes, different folks, clearly.
So Antonio Brown, what exactly do you want? The NFL did not even put you on the exempt list. What are you complaining about exactly?
Ryan Clark's still here with us, AB's former teammate. Stephen A., I'll start with you. Do you expect to see Antonio Brown in the NFL again?
I expect to see Antonio Brown in the NFL again. Eventually, his money is going to dry up, unless he's far more intelligent than many people, including myself, give him credit for. Supposedly, he's going back to school. Maybe he's just a dude who does not conform well or fit in well to group environments. There are many people like that. I'm like that. I don't like to be a member of groups because, as I always state, the bigger the crowd, the dumber the crowd. Some people are meant to be sovereign. Maybe that's what's meant for him. He has to go off and find his destiny, maybe start a business, who knows, where he can be the boss. He certainly is someone who, at the very least, has an image of himself as a shot caller. Maybe we can call it delusions of grandeur, who knows.
No, I do not. Obviously, one would look at his talent, and one would say, obviously, with the NFL, with their bottom line tendencies, but one.
All businesses have a bottom line tendency, Stephen A. Smith.
Somebody like him, and they're willing to tolerate somebody like him. My response to that would be, although it is absolutely correct that there are people who've done far worse than Antonio Brown, that managed to be in the National Football League, I would bring up the name Colin Kaepernick only for this reason.
Well, Colin Kaepernick is woke, as is Antonio Brown. And the reason why both of those players are out of the NFL is because they're too woke for their own good. So that really is congruent. Many people might say, well, what does Colin Kaepernick have to do with Antonio Brown? They're not equivalent whatsoever. Actually, they are. They've both fallen down the woke rabbit hole and they cannot get up.
His decision to kneel and, in the owner's eyes, compromise the bottom line.
His alleged decision to kneel, I believe that most of that was coordinated.
They wanted to send a message to discourage others from following him in the future, being pioneers in certain movements. Antonio Brown directly attacked Robert Kraft. How do you think that's going to flow with the other 31 owners in the National Football League? I mean, if they take bottom line issues personally, as it particularly just pertains to dollars, what do you think they're going to make of personal attack?
Well, let's say this very quickly. Antonio Brown is not the first great athlete to try to go back and forth with his quote-unquote owner or with the owner of the franchise that he plays for. Michael Jordan, at certain points in his career, would go back and forth with Jerry Reinsdorf as well as Jerry Krause. That's why I state we have to be very careful when we start to castigate great athletes for getting into little skirmishes or arguments with general managers, with owners. Because when we establish precedent and look back at history, that's very common for superstar players to get into little issues, as I've already stated, skirmishes with GMs, owners, executives, etc. The real issue with Antonio Brown is that he does not know when enough is enough.
Acts aimed in the direction of an owner. They ain't flying with that. Let's get to the personals.
They'll fly with it if they need him bad enough. Believe me, if you're a football team that believes with all earnestness that you're just one superstar wide receiver away from being a serious contender for a Super Bowl title, they will take that chance on Antonio Brown, especially if he's in need of money. That tends to instill a form of fabricated humility.
This man, Antonio Brown, decides that what he wants to do, allegedly,
and let the record show, his Patriots teammates seem to like him quite a bit. Julian Edelman, Tom Brady, they were both very supportive of AB. And I believe that they're going to try to keep a little hook and a line inside of AB's helmet, proverbially speaking, over the course of this season, with the hopes that maybe they can convince Bob Kraft to bring him back later on this year or even next year. Do not be surprised if that happens.
Is the text messages that he sent out about the person accusing him, the second charge against him. He sent out pictures of her children. In the meantime, he also made sure to talk about Big Ben yesterday. He talked about Robert Kraft yesterday. He talked about Shannon Sharp yesterday.
Antonio Brown is trying to compete with Tekashi 6ix9ine and see who could talk about more people than the other person.
Okay, he brought up these folks' names. How do you think that's going to fly in the locker room? He's called Ryan Clark a sellout. He's attacked Juju Smith-Schuster. How do you think that's going to flow? He sat up there and went after Mike Tomlin. I'm sorry, he threw Mike Tomlin under the bus. How do you think that's going to flow? This man...
Well, hey, at least he's equal opportunity.
Give him credit for this. He clearly doesn't discriminate.
Hey. Let the record show I did not see this segment before making this video. So I give Stephen A. Smith credit for seeing the same thing that I just saw. He does not discriminate. Anybody can get it. No matter who you are, your color, your standing, your power. Antonio Brown gonna let you have it.
Thank everybody. He's tech owner, tech coach, tech teammates, tech contemporaries. I mean, he has pulled no punches, okay? And he has shown that he can absolutely, positively not be trusted. I won't even get into the Sports Illustrated article where if you take into account having a tank filled of piranhas put in his home and...
Why are you worried about his pet fish for, Stephen A. Smith?
No, and having a personal valet and all, you know.
Okay. Are you hating? Are you jealous? Do you wish that you had a personal valet?
Chef, take care of a part. This man has earned over $69 million before taxes in his career. According to the Sports Illustrated article, owes $75,000, $921 and change, and can't pay that back. All right? So you can't be trusted.
Allegedly.
Money. Can't be trusted with information. Can't be trusted to have a relationship with people where you honor the code of not publicly revealing the things that people say to you and just putting it all out there. Who would want him around? I don't know of anybody. I mean, it's at a point right now where I think that no matter what team he goes to, you'll have players in an uproar because they'd have a problem with somebody in that locker room. Don't get it twisted, New England.
Well, look, don't get it twisted, as Stephen A. Smith would state. Antonio Brown is at a Dennis Rodman level of chaos factor as well as talent factor. It's pretty much equal. He's the #1 agent of chaos in the NFL right now, and you can argue that just based on position, he's the #1 talent in the NFL as well. Because don't get it twisted, as a wide receiver, he is, in my view, unequaled. I would take him over Julio Jones. I would take him over Odell Beckham when it comes to his ability to make big plays in big games, make any catch, run any route, so on and so forth. So you have to have a very strong framework as a team to bring him in. That's why I thought that New England would have the best chance of any team of maybe being able to reel him in, a la the Chicago Bulls with Dennis Rodman in the late 90s. And I also think that there's a chance that they might bring him back.
Different story, because Bill Belichick is seen as having ultimate control, and obviously Mr. Robert Kraft made the move. Bill, we getting rid of this brother. He's got to go. And it's nice that Tom Brady has said nice things about him. But by and large...
Well, Tom Brady understands what it means to have those crosshairs keyed on you. And Tom Brady also understands that he probably has about 3 years left in the NFL. And if he were to have an Antonio Brown for those last 3 years, that would be a great boost for the last little bit that he has left.
Players, coaches, ownership, management with Mayock and Gruden. There's nowhere you can turn where he hasn't created an elevated level of distrust in his direction.
He will play in the NFL again, I believe. It won't
I agree.
anytime very soon, but eventually he will. And the reason is, Stephen A., I agree with every single word you just said about Antonio Brown. There's something wrong with Antonio Brown. Emotionally, mentally, like, there's something wrong. And I've hesitated saying that.
His understanding of reality is skewed because he's fallen down the woke rabbit hole. And Max Kellerman, you're one of the chief white rabbits on the liberal sports television that helps to misguide and mislead many of these delusional athletes in that direction. With your silly socialist / Marxist meanderings on television every day, trying to reinstill that victimization mentality in the minds of these cats who often were not raised in stable homes so that they can discern and decipher exactly what's being stated on TV. There's a big difference between information and propaganda.
Until now, and I've alluded to it, I've suggested maybe, but clearly this is such self-destructive behavior. There's something wrong here. Nothing. Maybe he got drunk with his own success. He had a tough background, and maybe that's it's destabilized him in certain ways.
There are a lot of players in the NFL and the NBA who've come from tough backgrounds. Antonio Brown is suffering from the disease of self-worship. He's a narcissist of the caliber of LeBron James, of Lance Armstrong, and maybe even further than any of those dudes.
nothing that sobers you up like reality. And I'm not talking about the kind of reality, Stephen A., that he now hears the headlines or he's not playing football or whatever, because whatever money he owes or doesn't owe, he's still getting out of a fancy car and going into a fancy house and eating what he wants, when he wants, and all those kind of things. But when reality sets in, when his real revenue stream is cut off, and when the thing he does better than maybe anyone in the world, almost as well as anyone who's ever done it, it sets in that he can't do that anymore. Then I have a feeling he'll be sobered up enough to calm down and maybe try to make some amends and get back. And in our culture, we like nothing better anyway than to build someone up, tear him down. We didn't tear Antonio Brown down. He did that to himself. But then watch them pick themselves back.
I agree. It's the humiliation ritual. America does enjoy that, especially with these so-called black male athletes. That's why I state you have to have a great keenness of mind to understand the job of the liberal sports media. Their role is to act as if they're a friend to the so-called black man, while surreptitiously using him for ratings. In part 1 of this series, I stated that the former star forward of the New York Knicks, Kristaps Porzingis, was also the recipient of equally malicious allegations from a female that lived in his building. That storyline did not lead First Take. It did not lead Undisputed, for whatever reason. Why is that? It's because the energy that the so-called black man emits is far more potent, far more powerful than speaking about the paragon of this society and of this kingdom, that being the Caucasian heterosexual male. They're pretty much off limits unless what they do is so heinous that it has to be reported, like a Ben Rapelessberger, someone along those lines. Because it was very obvious what Ben was doing, multiple females reported that he had sexually assaulted them. So that was a conundrum for the liberal sports media at that time. I wonder how they would report it today, as we're in the midst of the quote-unquote Me Too era. If they would try to push it under the rug as long as possible and hope that there was some silly black athlete who would show the lack of prudence necessary to put himself at the forefront of the ire of the liberal sports media so that he could lead their show, because it's very clear that they prefer to talk about the so-called black man and his foibles.
And I think if and when Antonio Brown hits rock bottom, he will do that and wind up back in the league at some point. But it doesn't seem to me, based on his tweets, which make him, he sees himself as a victim, refuses to take responsibility.
Well, once again, that's because of people like yourself, Max Kellerman, who always tried to cast the so-called black man as an invalid, someone who is deserving of not just pity, but coaching, usually by the liberal Caucasian, particularly the liberal Caucasian Jew. You believe that you're the divine light that's going to lead the so-called black man out of mental and spiritual slavery. And the main antidote that you believe is going to cure the so-called black man of his poison is victimhood. So you can't complain about it right now. You're the one who has taught the so-called black man to accept that belief system.
Continues to do stupid things in text messages. It doesn't seem to me that that point is now. But Ryan, I do believe it will come at some point in the future.
No, I absolutely believe Antonio Brown will get an opportunity to play in this league.
Of course he will. He's one of the top 2 or 1% of players in the entire NFL.
We'll see him again on a team for many of the reasons that Max has mentioned. And Stephen A., you are absolutely right about everything you say about Antonio Brown. As far as impulse control goes, this is the worst I've ever seen it. As far as a guy not being able to control his emotions enough to just get by on great talent.
Right, but that's a part of the woke propaganda. Wokeism tells the so-called black man that he should quote-unquote speak his mind at all times about everything, even on topics that he has no knowledge of whatsoever, or when it would actually behoove him to keep silent. The internet still tells people to run their mouth. At least the woke contingent tells people to run their mouth at all times.
Do what he loves to do in a way that not many people can do it and make enormous amounts of money. The fact that he's ruined that is crazy to me. But I do believe we love a redemption story. We like to see people come back. And when the reality sets in, when you already lose Zenith and then you lose Nike, and now you won't be getting the money that you expected through those guarantees, and life starts to change, you will be a little different. Here's Antonio Brown's problem. Antonio Brown's problem is understanding fault and understanding responsibility. When he deals
and accountability.
anything. Nothing has been his fault. We even argued over whether it was Mike Tomlin, if it was Big Ben, did Juju Smith-Schuster do anything? When he was in Oakland, was it John Gruden's fault, Mayock's fault? No, it's been Antonio Brown's fault.
Well, it's been Antonio Brown's fault, but he's had a series of enablers. Mike Mayock, John Gruden, the head coach over there in Pittsburgh, Mike Tomlin, they've all been enablers. New England is not going to enable you, not even a little bit.
Doesn't have to accept that. What he has to accept is responsibility, because once you accept responsibility, now going forward, you understand that your actions have to change what happened in the past and fix it going forward. When you send out text messages while you're on the New England Patriots, it's only compounding a situation that may not be your fault.
Well, the issue that AB had was that it was starting to become rather obvious that people were coming out of the woodwork to, as they say today, clout chase. And each and every allegation was being refuted by Antonio Brown, and he was making his accuser look silly. You had the doctor who claimed that Antonio Brown farted in his face and he was upset about it. And all Antonio Brown did was present text messages showing that the doctor had no issue with it when it happened because he got exposure on television. So Antonio thought he was going to do the same thing with this female because he felt like he was on a roll. Obviously, he played himself.
But now, by you not taking responsibility, the action of today, the action of the present time is what has you sitting at home. And so for Antonio Brown, he needs to get a different circle. He needs to get a circle of truth tellers that do not need him.
Right, but what happens when you're not intelligent enough to understand who's telling you the truth and who isn't? What then?
He needs to find somebody that says, going forward, you need to move in a different way. And locker rooms are the most forgiving place in the world.
Especially when you have talent. So if you're super talented like Antonio Brown and a super hard worker, people will forget very quickly, especially if you're a wide receiver.
If he does that, and he can help a team win, and they need to win bad enough, it'll be just like it was when we saw Cyborg Antonio Brown in New England.
Well, first of all, let me say this. It's real nice for you to say that. I get where you're coming from. You're being very diplomatic and classy in your words, and so is Max. And I'm not...
Well, it's easy for Ryan Clark to be diplomatic and classy because he sees that Antonio Brown has the entire boot of the liberal sports media on his neck. So he no longer has to lambaste Antonio. He's been proven correct.
That you're wrong because history shows that you're absolutely probably right. Okay, but here's the difference. He attacked an owner. And what I'm saying is you can talk to me about that locker room all you want to. Who decides whether you're in that locker room? Even the coach, even the GM, they answer to the dude upstairs.
Stephen A. Smith, I promise you, even though Antonio Brown attacked the quote-unquote owner, there are going to be other owners across the NFL who will be willing to give him a chance depending on need. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
That owner. And the fact that
Robert Kraft may even be willing to give him another chance, especially if they're able to conduct some type of ritual where Antonio Brown shows culpability, accountability, and humility.
Is when he went about the business of attacking Robert Kraft, when he made that move, I'm saying those other owners, in an effort to send a message.
Well, shit, isn't Robert Kraft one of these wokey-woke owners who supposedly is interested in prison reform? Why don't he just give Antonio Brown another chance?
Oh, I have no... Let me tell you something right now. To me, anything that y'all say is absolutely on the money without the attack on Robert Kraft.
But here's what...
When you went after Robert Kraft, I'm just taking those other owners into consideration.
I've been in the room with these owners when it comes down to negotiations and figuring out what the CBA is going to be. They don't jive together like that. I've been around them when it comes to...
I agree. They're not in lockstep like Stephen A. Smith would like to project them as being.
It's sharing. And so if...
I'm not saying they're bought together.
Yeah, but what I'm telling you is Antonio Brown isn't going to affect the bottom line like Colin Kaepernick did. Antonio Brown playing football is going to put people in the seats because he can do that like not many
Colin
can.
Kaepernick
And by the way, Kaepernick, real quick on Kaepernick, if Kaepernick was playing like...
Wait a minute, did Stephen A. Smith just state that Colin Kaepernick never affected the bottom line? Let me rewind this back a little bit. And I just rewound it back a little bit because I needed to rehear if Stephen A. Smith stated what I thought he stated. Ryan Clark basically is going to make a distinction between Antonio Brown and Colin Kaepernick by stating that the reason why an owner will bring Antonio Brown back is because Antonio Brown never affected the bottom line like Colin Kaepernick did. For anyone who's been following Stephen A. Smith and a lot of his arguments, his statements, his soliloquies about Colin Kaepernick, he started to finally acknowledge that the reason why the owners have not allowed Colin Kaepernick back into the vicinity of the overall aura of the NFL is because he was affecting their bottom line. Due to the fact that Stephen A. Smith understands that Ryan Clark is making him look stupid, he's so desperate that now he's going to state that Colin Kaepernick did not affect the NFL's bottom line when he's been arguing that exact point for the last 7 or 8 months. Let's pay very close attention.
To put people in the seats because he can do that like not many
Colin
can.
Kaepernick never talked about
Kaepernick.
Hey Steve, sometimes in life you just gotta take the L, brother. Stop changing your arguments.
Quick on Kaepernick. If Kaepernick was playing like Patrick Mahomes one last scene,
Absolutely. He'd be back in the league. He'd have been back in the league already. And that's what people don't understand. And that's proof that this other hypocrite on the right, this super liberal anarchist on TV that I call Marx Kellerman, even he understands the real reason why Colin Kaepernick was not brought back into the NFL. He was not worth the trouble at the end of the day.
he'd be in the league. Like, one of the things that gives the owners plausible deniability is, yeah, we could probably use Kaepernick. He's not going to win a Super Bowl for us. It's not like he was the best player in football. Antonio Brown, when last seen, had a very strong case that he's not only the best receiver in football, but one of the top 2 or 3 who ever lived. He has a case that he can make.
That's my point. Antonio Brown is a top 1%, at worst, top 2% player in the entire NFL.
The thing is this, too. We're acting like he was wrong about Robert Kraft. Those other owners know what Robert Kraft did wasn't right. Those other owners understand that it doesn't look good on the NFL, that it affects the shield, that it affects...
Let me tell you something, man. If Antonio Brown was still on the Patriots, him and Tom Brady was going to wreck the entire NFL this year, man. Wow.
That owners are looked at, but...
This dude, Antonio Brown, adjusts to the football mid-flight as well as any receiver I've ever seen.
Made a statement that was true, and they're not going to risk not winning games if they can get Antonio Brown for a price that they want. If they can get Antonio Brown a total line like he did in New England, they will accept him. I think you're just overestimating how much they care about Robert Kraft.
No, that's not what I'm doing, and I can't believe you're interpreting it as me saying that. I'm not talking about Robert Kraft. I'm talking about themselves. In other words, we can look at Colin Kaepernick. We have highlighted that this notion that he compromised their bottom line was false. So why are they keeping him out of the league? Even though I appreciate your point, Max, about the talent.
Stephen A. Smith, how could you state that the notion that Colin Kaepernick compromised the bottom line of the NFL owners is false when that's been the exact point that you've been trying to substantiate over the past 7 to 8 months? And on top of that, we all know that there was a dip in the NFL ratings in the direct aftermath of the Colin Kaepernick quote-unquote protest, which really was just a ritual to promote chaos throughout the NFL.
Antonio Brown, compared to what Colin Kaepernick was doing this last year, the reality is they want to send a message as a dissuasive measure for those who may be tempted to follow in his footsteps for whatever agenda that they may have down the line, because their mentality, as you have highlighted in the past, Ryan, is keeping cats in check and making sure you understand a chain of command. And I'm saying it's not about Robert Kraft. Forget him for a second. I'm saying overall, if you are a player and you go out front and center and you attack an owner, that usually does not work good for you. That's all I'm saying.
This is a point.
Well, DeAndre Hopkins down with the Houston Texans, he's made certain statements about the recently deceased owner of the Texans. Great players are going to have certain issues with owners. As long as your production is there, they normally let certain things go. With Antonio Brown, he happened to fall into a culture that is so hard-lined. They could not afford to tolerate what he was doing because they believe that that would go against their reputation.
Hey, Stephen A., this is a point you usually make, but I'm going to throw it back at you in this case. When you're as good as Antonio Brown, what you just said, that dynamic means that they're going to use it against you to pay you less ultimately. But
thank you, sir.
If he humbles himself, which I believe he will, although I don't know if it'll happen this year, someone's going to give him a job because he can catch the hell out of a football.
And I'm saying to you, that might be right, Max. That might be a very valid point. They'll use it as an excuse to really, really lowball him. But if he's consistent with what he says about not playing for pennies or not having his dollars compromised, okay, they clearly are going to do at least that. And that's going to be one of the motivations behind it, which means that he wouldn't be there because he's not going to accept the conditions they're going to force him to inhale.
Well, that's what he's saying right now, because he has to maintain a certain element of sovereignty for his audience, for his cult. He has a very Wizard of Oz type of element to him right now. He has a fan base that's in awe of him on the internet, and he has to try to maintain that. Eventually, he's going to create some type of pretext to justify why he's going to try to get back into the NFL, because at the end of the day, his money is not endless. He knows that. That's why he's already riffing about what the NFLPA will potentially do for him.
It's an eviction notice.
Yeah, but part of him being upset about the money that he lost was...
Thank you, sir.
Because he signed contracts that allow these teams, both Oakland and New England, to get out of those contracts without paying him. So clearly he will sign something that's actually not beneficial to him going forward. He is...
Or his agent will get him to sign.
Signing these things in a genius way. Drew Rosenhaus isn't making these ironclad contracts, and so I believe there will be somebody who can figure out a way to finagle numbers and get Antonio Brown into a team. I just know that the things he's done, I've seen teams forgive a lot more from a player.
Thank you, sir.
A lot less talent. And Antonio Brown has a ton of talent. He'll be humbled, and we saw him for 2 weeks in New England.
I've almost seen every superstar in every sport that I've ever watched get into a back and forth with the general manager and or the owner. Whether it was Charles Barkley, Patrick Ewing, whoever. From way back in the day. Jerry Rice fell out with Bill Walsh when Bill Walsh wanted to get rid of him when he got older. It happens, man.
He's the biggest con artist to ever live, and he can learn to conform as long as it's working for him.
No question. We know talent has afforded second, third, fourth, fifth chances in the NFL. And we also know that if he had stayed with Oakland, what was he going to have, $30 million guaranteed?
Yes.
And we also have to see what happens with these charges. Like, I mean, rather with these cases, we're all assuming...
Them cases ain't going anywhere. All those cases did was disrupt an already easily disrupted spirit, someone who's mentally and psychologically as well as spiritually unstable, and lead him to his own demise. And that's why you have to show prudence, especially when people attack you and you know the attacks are baseless.
These cases don't progress in a way that's super unfavorable to him. If he's found guilty of some of the things he's accused of, that's a whole other conversation.
Well, first take...
Well, he can't get found guilty of anything because there have been no criminal charges levied against him yet. The people who have tried to make these allegations know that they don't have a real leg to stand on.
ESPN will be all over that, that's for sure. As Pat...
But anyway, that's basically it on that. We'll see how things turn out for Mr. Antonio Brown. So peace.